Hello, everyone. If we can just get everyone to take their seats. And we're going to start. Thank you. Welcome. Thank you all for coming. My name is Margaret Gillis, and I am the president of the International Longevity Centre of Canada. I'm co-president of the International Longevity Centre Global Alliance, and I'm also the ambassador of Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario. I am chairing today's session, which is entitled The Intersectionality of Ageism and Sexism, Harnessing the Power of Older Women, with my colleague Kahir Lalji. I would like to acknowledge that we are in New York City on the unceded territory of the Lenape Nation, and we are grateful to have this opportunity to present from this territory. I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors and partners, beginning with the Mission of Canada and the Mission of Chile, UNDESA, HelpAge Canada, Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario, and the International Longevity Centre Global Alliance. We are also supported in this event by the International Network of Prevention of Elder Abuse, the Stakeholder Group on Aging, and the International Federation on Aging. I want to begin this discussion by talking about Ambassador Julia Alvarez, an older woman who certainly harnessed her power here at the United Nations. As ambassador for the Dominican Republic, she championed the rights of older persons for 23 years, starting in 1978. Known as the Ambassador of Aging, Julia Alvarez was the driving force behind the World Assembly on Aging in 2002 and the resulting Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging and the Political Declaration, which provides a framework for the advancement of older persons worldwide. Her work resulted in concrete and visionary achievements, such as the UN Day of Older Persons, now celebrated worldwide on October 1st. This day provides a much-needed voice and visibility to older women and men. Ambassador Alvarez also took the United Nations on for its mandatory retirement age of 60 and worked at the UN well into her 70s. Ambassador Alvarez was inspired by another UN trailblazer, Eleanor Roosevelt, and followed in her footsteps, focusing on women's rights, older women, persons with disabilities, and older people in developing countries. When asked about her advice to older women, she noted that we must enjoy every age, for each stage has its precious moments. She beautifully captured that older people were the most appropriate candidates for the role as peacekeepers because we can see the future in our grandchildren's eyes. In the spirit of Ambassador Alvarez, I want to acknowledge Ambassador Bob Rae, who will be speaking shortly, and Ambassador Paula Narvaez, who was unfortunately unable to attend at the last minute. Both Ambassadors Rae and Narvaez have carried on the trailblazing legacy of Julia Alvarez as ambassadors of aging. Ambassador Narvaez is the permanent representative of Chile to the United Nations, where she has shown exemplary leadership with a consistent dedication to the human rights of older people, evidenced by her work with the UN Group of Friends of Older Persons. We must thank Ambassador Narvaez and Chile for stepping up to facilitate General Assembly Resolution 78325, which was successfully adopted by consensus and paves the way for the next step to begin drafting a UN Convention on the Rights of Older Persons. We are also grateful to Chile for bringing the issue of care and support systems to the Commission for Social Development, an issue near and dear to the hearts of older women who make up the largest contingent of caregivers in the world. Ambassador Rae has similarly been a steadfast supporter of the rights of older persons. Ambassador Rae is the permanent representative of Canada, hence our meeting here today, to the United Nations in New York, and he's currently the president of UN ECOSOC. He's a former premier of Canada's largest province, Ontario, and a former parliamentarian in Canada's federal government, where he was leader of the Liberal Party. Since becoming ambassador, he has been an advocate for older persons, hosting initial discussions to create the core group at the open-ended working group, which moved forward the issue of the convention. He also had Canada join the Bureau on Older Persons at the open-ended working group and supported behind the scenes with Canada's excellent team of diplomats working to ensure older people are included in resolutions at a number of UN meetings. Ambassador Rae, you have been transformational in your support of older persons' rights, and we have responded to our calls to speak, to meet with us, to listen, respond, and defend our human rights. We also appreciate your fight for multilateralism, and we are grateful. Ambassador Rae, please take the floor.
Well, thank you, Maggie. Thank you so much. And it's great to be with you this afternoon. I've expressed my great appreciation for all of you being here and for coming to talk about a subject that I think is of tremendous importance to all of us. I'm acutely aware that since I turned 77 on August the 2nd, I think I can officially indicate to all of you that I know I have a conflict of interest in being here. I'm not a woman, but I do have a sense of the passage of time, as well as a feeling that despite that passage of time, I still feel personally that I have something to contribute and want to continue to be able to do that. But more broadly, I have to say that we're all the products of our own history. My mother and my sister and my two grandmothers, who I knew very, very well into my 30s, were, and my mother obviously even longer, my sister's still alive and going strong. It all comes down to one's own personal experience and one's own personal relationships and how they have mattered. My father's mother, whose name was Nell Rae, was born in Scotland, and her father didn't think that girls should go to school past the age of 12. And sort of a Scottish Taliban, I guess, of the time. But despite that fact, she was self-taught and just lived right up to the very end of her life, which lasted until she was 107. And when my political career was starting, and she would always say, I want to go into the Home for the Aged, which was on the corner, and still is, on the corner of Broadview and Danforth in Toronto. And I'd say, no, where are you going? She says, I want to go see the old people. Of course, she was older than anybody in the place. But she was making a point that even though she might be chronologically old, she was not given up the ship and was determined to keep on fighting. And my mother's mother was the same way, and my mother was the same way. And so I've lived surrounded by women who profoundly believed that they had an enormous amount to contribute, and they were going to continue to do it, regardless of what anybody else would think or would do. And we need to understand that we're living in a time when we are all getting older, when our societies are getting older, and even in those countries which are officially young, those young people will get older, and they'll get much older, perhaps even than our generation will, as we go forward. So for me, it's about the foundational principle of dignity, and the realization that unfortunately I have, that is that women will live longer than men, and so they have a longer time at which society will treat them as if they are on the sidelines and to be smiled at occasionally, but not to be given any particular sense that they have something to contribute and to make a difference. And so this issue of aging and ageism and the interconnectedness between that and other forms of discrimination, which are around us all the time, mean that we have a special obligation and duty, I believe, in our society to really pay attention and to think of the ways in which we can change our approaches to things that will recognize everyone's dignity, no matter what age they may happen to be, but also recognize the struggles that people face, struggles of loneliness, of being on your own, of surviving or outlasting a partner, or having lived alone one's whole life. It becomes more difficult as people get older. How the value of people is very quickly discounted as they get older, and how that leads to further marginalization. And from a social point of view and from an economic point of view, it means a huge loss, because there's so many things that people can be doing and can be contributing and making a difference. And this becomes something that I think we have to pay a special attention to. The second thing is care. And Maggie mentioned it, and I think it's important for us to really appreciate that the care economy is a real thing. It's a big thing, not just in advanced economies, but around the world. It's a huge fact that there's such a substantial number of people who are working, but who are receiving no compensation, and whose contribution is unrecognized, and whose needs are unrecognized as well. So there'll be there's a growing need to understand care, what it means to need care, and how we need to work, how we do that, and then understand that most of the people who are caregivers are either dramatically underpaid or not paid at all, because it's a mother or a daughter or a sister who's doing the caregiving, and most of the caregiving is done by women. It's not done by men, although there are some outstanding examples that we all are aware of. But it's the reality is that's how this work is framed in many parts of the world. And so there's a tendency in our countries to say, yeah, we get that. But, it's all covered by the Charter of Human Rights, or it's covered by human rights legislation. So that's enough. We don't need any more attention to be paid than that. And I have been carrying on an ongoing discussion, really an argument, with my government, which will continue, because I don't get a sense that the attitudes are changing fast enough, to say, look, it's important for us, and it doesn't take a lot of time, it doesn't take a lot of effort. It's just about expanding one's horizon to the point where we can say to other countries, we are in on this, and we know what needs to be done, and we know that it actually will help us to have a particular approach, legal approach, that will be accepted and will be then part of a general framework of law and obligation. Certainly, we continue to need to know more about what's going on. We need more studies. We need more analysis. We need to understand it. And we also need to understand that this is something where women deserve better, and frankly, where our society requires better. So that's the spirit in which I've come. I can stay for part of the discussion, but unfortunately not all of it, because of the ridiculous schedule that I'm keeping because of the ECOSOC meetings. But it's an enormous pleasure to be here and to be with you. And let me, as Maggie's been very kind about me, let me just say that one of the lessons in life we all learn is things only happen because people make it happen. They don't, historical forces, yeah, that's important, but they don't actually bring you here. We're here because of her and because of people like her and the people who are around and making a difference. And Maggie's just been tremendous and relentless, if I may say so, in getting us here. And one of the nicest things that happened to me after I was sent here, was that after putting up a big fight with the government about a particular issue and winning, the staff, one of the groups in the department, sent me a package, came from them, and one of them sent me a message saying, "Did you get your package?" And I said, "No, I didn't get it." And she said, "Well, wait for it. When you get it, let me know." I said, "Okay." So it's a plaque that just says, Hurricane Bob, at your service since 1948. And I thought it was great. And I've still got it, and it's still on my desk at home. And I look at it every once in a while and say, yeah. But that's how things happen. They don't happen unless you make them happen. So it's really important to understand the value of fighting the good fight, and of making sure that we're going to just don't go quietly into that dark night, just keep going. And that's, I think, how we're going to succeed. So thank you very much for the chance to be with you. Thank you.
I want to acknowledge, where's Elizabeth Tudor-Bezes? Is she here? Elizabeth in the room? There she is. Okay, so there's a wonderful woman who has supported us and in behind the scenes, advocating for older persons at many, many sessions. And I once said to her, oh, Elizabeth, it's so easy to work with you. And I know it's really easy to work with me. And she goes, no, it's not. So I just wanted, she does slip off the diplomatic scene every so often. Anyway, I want to move on. Thank you, Elizabeth, for all you do. Our next speaker is Ms. Amal Rafeh, who's the chief of the Program of Aging section at the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs here in New York. In this role, she oversees and follows up on the Second World Assembly on Aging, including the review and appraisal of the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging. She has incredible, strong credentials in human rights and has shown a dedication to older people that I think any of the advocates in the room here can say has just been absolutely marvelous. And we have so benefited from her knowledge of the system and her ability to just push us an issue through. So similar to our two ambassadors on aging, she has been absolutely inspiring. And with that, please take the floor.
Thank you, Margie, for the opportunity to speak today. Let me begin by warmly thanking our friends from the North, Canada, and the Canadians for organizing and hosting this important event and for their principled and compassionate leadership on these issues. Many of us here deeply admire Ambassador Bob Rae. His steadfast commitment to older persons, paired with his sharp political instincts, has helped navigate this agenda through some tough waters. He knows the fight isn't over, as he said, and I hope we'll see him move a few more mountains yet. To truly understand how people live, contribute, and are supported throughout their lives, we must take age and gender seriously. These are not measures of individual worth, but essential lenses for examining how our economic and social systems are structured, and how they must change if we want everyone to live with dignity and security, perhaps even thrive. Ambitious, yes, but no less necessary. My colleague, Richard Dong, he's here today. Richard, say hi, who is joined the program on aging recently as an intern, asked a vital question: who is still being left behind? He analyzed voluntary national reviews submitted between 2023 and 2025, completing our team's analysis of all 402 VNRs submitted since 2016. He examined how often older persons were referenced under each of the 17 SDGs. What we found is both encouraging and sobering. About 4 in 5 VNRs include at least some mention of older persons or population aging, but these references are highly uneven across goals and over time. We will share the breakdown at tomorrow's event, and I want to acknowledge the presence of our colleague Aparna, where we're holding the first ever joint session between the two interagency groups on women and gender equality and on aging, a notable step towards stronger interagency collaboration. But for today, we focus on SDG 5, gender equality. When we extended our review to include 2024 and 2025, references to older persons under SDG 5 rose by just 1 percentage point, reaching 25%. Why? Because Austria began talking about gender pension gap, Nepal raised widowhood and income insecurity, Japan flagged poverty among older single women. It's a small increase, it's progress, but painfully slow. And this is terrifying when we know, based on DESA's 2025 SDG progress report, that SDG 5 is off track. All targets remain unmet, and progress is either stagnant or too slow. This is why I've chosen to frame today's remarks through this lens. of generational and gendered economies. Because while advocates have long made the case for older women's rights in the SDG framework, the message often didn't land with member states. And when it didn't stick. As well as we all know, political capital is limited. And when priorities are weighed, this constituency is often the first to fall off the radar. While no single trait defines a person, age remains one of the most consistent predictors of how we engage with the economy, whether through earning, caregiving, consuming, or receiving support. It helps us understand population-level patterns essential for planning, who is likely to be in school, in paid work, raising children, retired, or giving care. A recent DESA publication illustrates this example with a thought experiment. Imagine 3 people, one aged 2, one 40, and one 80. These reflect familiar life stages, education, work, retirement, though we know very well that these categories no longer tell the full story. Life unfolds in more complex and varied ways. I suppose what matters is how we value these experiences and who we value in them. That, as we know, is shaped profoundly by gender. The goal is not to reduce people to their age, that would be ageist, but to use age as a lens to understand key life transitions, entering or leaving the workforce, giving or receiving care, contributing to or depending on others. This is the foundation of the national transfer accounts, which track economy's resources like income, taxes, public benefits, and how they flow across generations. National transfer accounts have been estimated by national teams in over 80 countries using a method established by the UN in 2013. But these national accounts only tell part of the story, as Ambassador Rae had mentioned. To fill this gap, national time transfer accounts developed to measure the unpaid work that sustains families, work that moves between generations. This adds the crucial dimension of time and care, most of it provided by women, and routinely excluded from national accounts. It took years to develop robust methods that could use existing data and support meaningful cross-country comparisons. And today, national time transfer accounts estimates exist for 30 countries, providing the method's value in capturing the full range of economic contributions across the life course. To consolidate this growing work, DESA launched in December last year the National Time Transfer Accounts Manual. It lays out the theoretical foundation for studying generational and gendered economies together, highlights key findings from over a decade of research, and documents the progress countries have made. And the progress that countries have made. Some of the manual's most important insights include older women are often considered economically inactive in public statistics. But the National Time Transfer Account findings show otherwise. Older persons themselves, especially older women, continue to support others, transferring unpaid care and time down to grandchildren, across to spouses and siblings, and even upward to older parents or community members. In contrast to narratives that frame population aging as a pressure on public budgets, National Time Transfer Account findings reveal the generative force of older persons' contributions. Without data on time use, the manual warns that governments have a misleading picture of people's productive activities. In other words, our systems undercount precisely where older women over-contribute. And these blind spots have real consequences. Gender gaps in pensions, saving, and old age income security. Women also live longer and more likely experience disability to live alone in older age, yet systems often do not reflect these realities in service delivery or in social protection design. And most countries studied, in most countries that were studied in those 30 countries, unpaid household work amounts to 20 to 50% of GDP. Older women continue to carry a significant share of this, often without support. So what does this tell us? It tells us that ageism and sexism are not separate forces, they compound. The lives of older women make this intersection painfully clear, undervalued, undercounted, underserved. But it also tells us something hopeful, that we have to do better. Time use data helps us build economic systems that reflect reality, not just what happens in formal markets. They change the idea that older age is defined by decline. Instead, they show it is a time-continued contribution, especially through care. And they show that the economic invisibility of older women is not inevitable. It is a consequence of how and what we choose to measure. It's time to design systems that not only see older women, but finally value their work, respect their human rights, and invest in their futures. Thank you.
Thank you, Amal. I'd like to introduce Dr. Rosy Pereyra, who is the president of the International Longevity Center, Dominican Republic, and one of my colleagues. Dr. Pereyra is a geriatrician. She's also the vice president of the International Network Against Elder Abuse, a member of the Executive Council of the Global Aging Network, and past co-president of the International Longevity Center Global Alliance, where I had to continue in her incredible, huge shoes. Please come up, Rosy.
First, I'd like to thank Ambassador Rae for receiving us and for continued support in the work of abuse, contributions, and the work for the respect of human rights of older persons. Thank you, Margaret, for organizing this side event. And thank you all for being present today, because I know that we are sharing the same feeling. We need to fight for us, because we will be older one day. What brings me here today is to talk about what is happening in the Dominican Republic. For those that don't know this country, we have a population, an estimated population of, in 2025, of 11.5 million people. 50.2% are female, 49.7% are male. That actually shows that women will live longer than men. In rural areas, and I have to make a great difference between rural and areas and the city, in rural areas, women have greater disadvantages because of the existence of a high rate of illiteracy in our country. According to our last national census, the rate of illiteracy for women over 65 in rural areas was 20.5%. Nearly triple than the national, and that makes them more vulnerable. In the cities, however, the illiteracy rate is 1.9% for women and 1.1% for men. However, over the last 20 years, there has been a process of urbanization, and of today, around 84.45% of the population live in urban areas. In the case of older adults, women come to live in the cities more often than men because their children that migrate to the city looking for better opportunities take their mother with them so they can be in charge of looking after their children while they go out to work. And that is the reason why older men are left behind, especially in the South, in the Dominican Republic. When you go to the cities in the South, to the countryside, you see more men, older women, living alone than with their wives. In the cities, the challenges faced by older women are different. The gender pay gap is shown. Over the last 20 years, we have been experiencing a phenomenon of feminization of education, and there is a larger percentage of women than men in our universities. However, while higher education can help, the gender wage gap still persists. And according to the 2023 report by the Ministry of Economy, Planning and Development, women earn 9.4% less than men on average. That wage gap tends to be higher in the informal sector. There is also discrimination at workplace. Although women experience difficulty finding or keeping jobs due to ageist stereotypes about their adaptability to new technologies or their physical capabilities. There is limited access to training. Some employers may be reluctant to invest in training for older workers, further limiting their opportunities to adapt to changing jobs requirements. There are social security concerns. If an older woman experiences job loss or informal work due to ageism, may have difficulties in accumulating the necessary social security contributions for retirement. And there is a traditional gender roles and societal expectations in our country that may place additional pressure on older women to prioritize family and household responsibilities over career advancement. Sometimes we may think, what is the difference in a developed country? We are a country in transition, but we are working and going forward. There is intersectionality of age and gender. That's combination that Ambassador Rae also pointed out of ageism and sexism creates unique challenges for older women who may face greater risk of job loss due to automation and technological change compared to men. Although we have agreement with the International Organization of Work, where it says that you shouldn't discriminate because of age, we can see very often in Dominican newspapers when they advertise a job, they say, this job is for people less than 35 years of age. And nobody does anything about it. And it is prohibited, but nobody does anything about it. And we have seen, for instance, a friend of mine who went to our foreign minister, and she applied for a job. She was 55, and she applied for a job. She had passed all the requirements, and they didn't want to give her a job. She took them to our highest instances. She went to the Constitutional Tribunal, and she fought for it, and she got the job. So you have to, it's what Ambassador Bob say, nothing happens unless you fight for it. You have to pursue it and continue reluctantly, but you have to fight for it. Sometimes they have limited access to justice. Though legal protection exists, older women may face challenges in accessing justice, mechanisms to address age discrimination. And if they are abused, we have limited access to shelters. So those that experience violence or abuse may lack access to appropriate shelters and safe housing, hindering their ability to report the incidents. And there is another thing, women protect, you know that abuse occurs mostly and is inflicted by people that are near you, children, grandchildren. And if you don't have a shelter, if you don't separate the abused by the abuser, they will be in a very difficult situation. But women don't like to report their children. And you see that we have created a tribunal that is in one of our institutions. Every Thursday, they have a ministry, public ministry there to receive all the reports about abuse. And sometimes people, neighbors, have to report the abuse, but not the mother or the father. And sometimes, even if they are reported, they deny it when they go to the tribunal. They don't want to just give the report. And that's a great problem. And that doesn't happen only in the Dominican Republic. I think that is spread all around. And now, what is being done in the DR? Numerous laws addresses age and gender discrimination. We have our Constitution that prohibits discrimination of any type. The Dominican Labor Code that established the prohibition of discrimination as a fundamental principle, including age discrimination, and moreover, our country signed an agreement, as I said before, with the International Labour Organization. But nothing happens. The Code of Right for the older Dominican, Law 352/98, that aims to protect the rights of older adults, including the right of work without discrimination. And the Law 8701 that creates our social security system that doesn't discriminate with anyone. We have to create public awareness campaigns that can help to challenge negative stereotypes about older adults. We have to support older women's economic empowerment, ensuring access to decent work, social security, and financial independence. And for that, the Ministry of Industry and Commerce have created the program Women Entrepreneurship to promote microenterprises among women, providing training and accompaniment and access to credit in the state bank at very low interest. That has helped lots of women, all the women, with entrepreneurs that are entrepreneurs, and that have given the opportunity to a great amount of women to get involved. And as for today, 59% of entrepreneurships are created by women, with a significant amount of them belonging to older ones. In rural areas, although the participation of women in the peasant economy and their contribution to the reproduction of the labor force, though important, continues to face serious limitations to fulfill their role as agricultural producers in the materialization of their efforts to improve their living conditions and that of their families. For that reason, the Dominican government, the new, it's 4 years old now, the Dominican government has been promoting the access to credit, land ownership for women of all ages, and including their children, just to make sure it's an intergenerational thing, so that the credit is easier to get credit. That started, that doesn't come because of the thought of the government. That started after the Confederation of Women of the Countryside and the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization did a research study that raised awareness among the population about the conditions and the position of women in the different agrarian reform programs executed over the last 50 years. The agrarian reform programs, actually, about 50 years ago, started giving land ownership to anyone, sort of taking land for those large properties that belong to one person and giving land to people that work the land. That was practically impossible to get for a woman. But because of that study that showed that women not only deserved, but worked very hard to go in the countryside, that program has been established. And that makes the difference. When they have the ownership of the land, they can get credit, they can produce, they can sell their crops, and their economical situation improves. Finally, to combat ageism and sexism, individuals and organizations, we as individuals and organizations, should implement several strategies which include raising awareness about the negative impact of both biases, challenging stereotypes, promoting inclusive practice and fostering intergenerational connection, and at the same time, policies and legislation should be in place to address age and gender discrimination with mechanisms for enforcement and monitoring. You are all here because all of us want to do this. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosy. Our next speaker is Ms. Marta Hajek. She's the CEO of Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario, an organization which addresses elder abuse and ageism. Marta is also on the board of the International Longevity Centre of Canada and the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse. She's also an elected member to the Global Alliance on the Rights of Older Persons, and she has addressed the United Nations on a number of occasions calling for a convention on the rights of older persons. Marta.
Rosy.
fellow advocates, and champions of human rights. Good afternoon. Thank you, Margaret, for the honor and opportunity to address everyone here today. These are paradoxical times to be an older woman. While some take center stage in the arts, or public life, as a group, older women are largely seen as dependent, in decline, or just less relevant. This is not an accident. The intersection of pervasive ageism and sexism, both deeply entrenched social constructs, not only are a violation of human rights, they pose a direct barrier to global social progress. When older women are excluded from leadership and public discourse, from forums where decisions that shape our collective well-being, rights, and future are being made, society as a whole suffers. Now imagine a world where these voices and lived experiences, layered with resilience, knowledge, and care, were not just welcomed, but they were sought out. A world where policies embedded with dignity and equity would be more inclusive, more compassionate, and ultimately more just. The work we do as leaders of civil society and policy change makers must reflect the full complexity of older women's lives across diverse cultures, geographies, and generations. On average, women numbering some 600 million age 60 plus as of 2020 are living longer than men, with a life expectancy of 81 years. That longevity comes with challenges, as they are more likely to experience poverty, inadequate health care, chronic illness, food insecurity, social isolation, or overwhelming caregiving responsibilities. The UN independent expert on the enjoyment of all human rights of older persons has noted that these additional years of life offer an opportunity for greater social participation and better social outcomes. Women have always navigated rigid expectations to be agreeable, to be nurturing, self-sacrificing, to forever be judged by appearance, how we serve, and how we conform to social norms. Yet as we age, those judgments evolve not into respect, but slide into the bias and stereotypes of frailty and forgetfulness. Let me be clear, this is not the way forward. In Canada, older women are some of the most resilient, experienced, and undervalued citizens. Many live alone, experience systemic barriers in accessing healthcare and social services they need. Still, they show up every day as volunteers, caregivers, cultural leaders, knowledge keepers, and community anchors. They are not a burden. They are an essential part of the social fabric, bridging generations and holding communities together, leading quietly but persistently. Despite these contributions, older women are treated as if the best part of their lives is already behind them, even as they continue to lead critical conversations on reconciliation, climate, caregiver support, and gender-based violence. The feminization of aging, a phrase coined by the World Health Organization, remains a central hurdle that must be overcome. Indeed, one of the most urgent and underreported realities we must tackle is that older women disproportionately experience abuse and the devastating consequences of domestic and intimate partner violence, to the degree that many municipalities in Canada have now declared this an epidemic. From the perspective of my own organization, we see the impacts of this manifest every day. Ageism is the root cause of elder abuse, whether emotional, neglect, financial exploitation, or physical, psychological harm. Abuse occurs in places where older women should feel safest and where there is an expectation of trust. Yet far too many continue to suffer in silence, afraid to speak up, because they could lose what little security or supports they have. Uplifting older women and harnessing their power must begin with protecting human rights and dignity. We must be recognized as subject matter experts in aging. Who better to shape long-term care policies than the women who have provided unpaid care their entire lives? Or to advise on housing and urban planning, because we understand what it means to age in place. Expertise does not expire with age. It deepens. In this interconnected world, harnessing the transformative contributions of older women cannot be overlooked. Women are at the forefront of movements for systemic change, like the Canadian Coalition Against Ageism, where the advocacy draws on lived experiences that are deeply personal to drive meaningful change and, in fact, change that narrative about aging. Empowerment, not supported by a sustainable infrastructure, free of barriers, is a recipe for failure. We must invest in safe, affordable housing, adequate pensions, culturally relevant healthcare, digital literacy training, and accessible transportation. It means ensuring that funding reaches those community programs, shelters, and advocacy services that center on older women, especially those from Indigenous, racialized, rural, newcomer, and LGBTQ communities. Empowerment without access is mere rhetoric, and we will not unlock the potential without that equity lens. Finally, as service professionals, it is in an under-resourced, informal, community-based senior serving sector. We must do things for older women, but do them with them. Whether designing policies, programs, or international frameworks, older women must be at the table to guide our work through meaningful consultations. When older women are included, what we build is stronger, smarter, and more sustainable. An important point to note that supporting the well-being of older women across the globe demands better collection and analysis of disaggregated data by sex and age and other characteristics to capture and understand the multiple social and economic experiences and needs of this demographic. The way forward is through intention, not pity, rejecting the deficit lens of aging and instead harnessing the potential and power older women have. Older women are vital contributors to the social fabric of our world, not despite their age, but because of it. Thank you.
Okay. Our next speaker is Mr. Cherian Mathews. He's the Chief Executive of HelpAge International, which is the Secretariat for a global network of over 220 member organizations with the shared goal to promote the well-being, dignity, and rights of older people. Cherian has more than 35 years of international development experience, and currently he's pursuing a policy agenda on global aging and promoting the rights of older persons. Cherian, please come up.
Excellency, co-panelists, friends, and participants here and participants who are online. Thank you. Thank you for joining this particular session. And thank you, Margaret and Kahir, to putting together this wonderful panel. Older women are the backbone of many families and communities we work with. But too often, they are treated as if they no longer matter. As they age, a lifetime of gender inequality converges with ageism, leaving them both invisible in decisions that affect their lives and excluded from the very systems they have helped build and sustain. If we are serious about achieving SDGs for all women and girls, we must confront the global demographic reality and take a life course approach in achieving gender equality. Women over 50 make up 27% of female population, and their numbers are rising. Yet, they remain excluded in both policy and practice. To meet the goals and ensure older women's rights are upheld, we must address the compounding effects of sexism and ageism, gendered ageism, what we say, at every level of action and analysis. There is gender disparities in aging. The feminization of aging marked by a higher proportion of older women coupled with high rates of old age poverty increases economic and social insecurity for women in later life across lower and middle income countries. The older women we work with report experiencing gendered ageism in many aspects of their lives and across different settings, from relationship with family members, within community, as well as at the workplace. In low and middle income countries, older women's experience of gendered ageism are also often compounded by other intersecting identities, from disability to poverty, social norms that constrain their participation in civic life, high rates of illiteracy, and lack of awareness about their own rights. Let me share the story of Mariam, a 68-year-old woman from Tanzania whose life reflects the consequences of a health system and attitudes which fail to meet girls' and women's needs rise across the life course. As a young girl, Mariam had no access to reproductive health education. Her questions were met with silence both in home and at school. She married young and gave birth to 6 children, yet never received proper antenatal care, family planning services, or postnatal follow-up in her community. Her own health was never a priority for her. She worked 2 jobs to secure income for her children and took on the primary role as care provider for her family. By 50s, Mariam began experiencing menopausal symptoms, hot flashes, joint pain, mood changes alongside chronic conditions like hypertension. But any time she sought care, she was dismissed with ageist comments. "You are old now. What do you expect?" There was no acknowledgement of menopause within the healthcare system or community health services she received support from. Now in old age, Mariam, like many other old women, continues to provide care for family members, but also suffers from untreated pain, depression, and deep isolation. She was accused of witchcraft after her husband's death, a form of gender-based violence experienced by many older women that led to property loss and emotional trauma. Her story shows how ageism and gender inequality intersect, rendering older women invisible in both health and legal systems. Without a life course approach to women's health, we will continue to fail millions like Mariam, undermining SDG 3 on health and SDG 5 on gender equality. We have also seen that older women are active agents of change. They are the community leaders, peacemakers, contributors to the economy, carers, and list goes on. But negative ageist perceptions and stereotypes of older women mean they are seen as unproductive or burdens, reinforcing the ideas of aging negative and exclusion from policy development, community decision-making, and support. As a result, older women's voices, needs, and rights are not reflected in national policies or programs. There are initiatives to shift attitudes and practices. One of our network members in India, working in India's Thar Desert, has been working with older women to shift attitudes around women's participation in decision-making and to strengthen their knowledge and political influence around the climate resilient and adaptation methods. In Moldova, our members support initiatives to understand and combat violence against older women, including through setting up intergenerational groups at community level. Combined with such community initiatives, we should have comprehensive policies and processes to overcome the situation of Mariam and many older women who share similar experiences. We should ensure that we collect and use sex, age, disability disaggregated data. We should invest in women's participation and leadership across the life course. We should actively include older women in national policies and legal framework which protect and promote the rights of women of all ages. Join the drafting of a UN Convention on the Rights of Older Persons that would enable to combat gendered ageism globally. Gendered ageism is not just prejudice. It's a denial of dignity, agency, and justice, and we must work together to challenge this. Women's rights and inclusion should not end as they age. I would like to finish with a quote from an older woman in Costa Rica. Equality means having the same rights regardless of age or gender. Thank you.
Thank you, Cherian. I'd now like to hand the floor over to my co-moderator, Kahir Lalji. Kahir is the CEO of HelpAge Canada and Vice President of the International Longevity Centre of Canada, so we work together quite closely. He's also a caregiver, a son, a social gerontologist, and a member of a number of international committees and task force on aging. Kahir, the floor is yours.
Your Excellency and dear colleagues, I want to start off by paying homage to the contribution and leaderships of older persons around the world. I would like to also acknowledge and pay tribute and intentionally offer a space to recognize the disproportionate impact of climate events, war, conflict, poverty, and migration on the lives of older people who are often ignored and left behind in legislation, policy, programs, and whose voices often go unheard. Today, though, we heard about potential. In fact, I am here because of the leadership and generational impact of my maternal grandmother, who was the first female to hold a public office in her home country. This example permeates communities across the world, and today we recognize and celebrate the collective impact made by older people, and particularly older women throughout the world. HelpAge Canada is proud to be a co-sponsor of today's very important event, which explored two key pieces to the intersectionality pie: gender and age. I would like to thank the esteemed panelists for your insights and your commitment to advancing age, particularly of older women within the SDGs. We know that older people are not a homogeneous group, and there are older persons who experience compounding vulnerabilities and exasperated systemic discrimination. Imagine not having a voice due to your age, due to your gender, but imagine further. You just immigrated from war and conflict, you live in poverty, find yourself lost in a new culture and ways of being, and cannot speak the language. This is much too common, and events like the one today aim to amplify this cause. It is our collective responsibility to listen, reflect, and act. Gender-based analysis is important. Disaggregated data is important, as is using an intersectional lens to address equity, poverty, violence, health, etc. But age must be considered as a key component of the intersectionality continuum, and this is not always the case. Civil society is uniquely positioned to ensure the voices of older women are heard. Civil society can intentionally make space for older people, and in this case, older women, to be included and recognized for their leadership, their influence, and their contributions to economic, political, community, and family life. A person much wiser than I once told me that many things can be true at the same time. This is very much the case here. The role of older women in society is inextricably linked to progress and is the fabric of community at the micro, meso, and macro levels. Yet, older women face a heightened risk of poverty and neglect due to gender inequality, are more adversely affected by climate risk and humanitarian crises, and are more likely to live alone and suffer health inequities. As civil society, we must continue to our advocacy efforts and our work in unity to elevate the awareness of the blatant under and often non-representation of older women and more generally older people within the SDGs, within the human rights agenda, and indeed within in fact, all international systems and infrastructure at the international and national levels. Civil society organizations are fortunate to have the opportunity to inform policy, agenda, and resources based on their strong connection to community and the people we serve, in community, for community, and by community. As a result of the advocacy of our civil society work and partnerships, and with the support of member states, we have seen some movement, like at CSW, but we need to do more. In Canada, a number of organizations focused on aging, in partnership with the Government of Canada, are working together to eliminate ageism, pursue policy changes in the areas of healthcare access, income and decent work, and housing. And we are addressing ageist barriers and infrastructure through galvanizing older women, particularly older racialized women, to harness their power to enhance Canadian systems and processes. We invite others to join us in this cause. Once again, thank you to the panelists for your insights, for your leadership. At this time, I call upon the discussants from the floor to take the podium, introduce themselves, and offer their comment or question for the panel. I will start with Mr. Gregor Snedden, Secretary General of the International Federation on Aging.
Thank you to the Honorable Bob Rae and the Permanent Canadian Mission to the UN and the Government of Chile, ILC Canada and HelpAge Canada for hosting this important event. The IFA works with its global network, the UN and the WHO and intersectoral partners to drive the agenda of aging populations, always grounded first with a human rights lens. You know, my grandmother as well lived to the age of 102 in Glasgow, Scotland, like Mr. Rae, though it may have been because of the fresh water of the Clyde, I don't know. But she managed to make her way down to the shops every day. She still ironed her own tablecloth for herself. She had many cataract eye surgeries and had a widow of 40 years, still had a small pension. But that's not the case for many, many people, older women in the world who have to step out of the workforce, even the informal working economy, because they can't afford or access simple surgeries like cataract eye surgery or let alone life-saving immunizations, etc. What we've heard today, of course, exposes what we all know to be true. The intersection of ageism and sexism continues to silence, sideline, and hide millions of women acutely in later life. And yet older women, as we've heard, remain the unacknowledged infrastructure of our societies, caring for families, supporting communities, and sustaining informal economies across the globe. In Asia, for example, as noted by the Asia Development Bank, over 94% of adults over 65 continue working informally, and women are overwhelmingly represented in this space, working as unpaid laborers, domestic workers, and caregivers, often into their 70s and 80s. But their contributions are completely missed from social protection programs, health plans, and economic forecasts. And this isn't just an Asian story, of course, this is a global reality, an absurd and shameful reality that exposes our collective acceptance and perpetuation of ageist systemic structures that render populations who have offered their lives in the service of their families and communities a reward of disempowerment, poverty, and even homelessness, robbing our mothers, our sisters, our aunties, our grandmothers of the most basic human dignities. And we gather, of course, here at the UN's high-level political forum midway through the 2030 agenda, and precisely as member states prepare for the 5th review of the Madrid International Plan of Aging on Action on Aging, the global commitment to ensure that persons everywhere are able to age with security and dignity and to participate in their societies as citizens with full rights, I quote. SDG 5 that Ms. Abou Rafeh spoke to, gender equality, of course, is a theme that underpins all of the SDGs. After all, our overarching promise is to leave no one behind. But let's be clear in my question, my point, I'm getting there. I know we have many speakers today. It's not just a human rights issue, though this is, of course, where we begin. It's an economic and a social imperative. How do we as a global community recognize and celebrate the contributions, the lifelong contributions of women, and particularly older women in our informal economies? More importantly, how do we translate and formalize these contributions into policy and action? The IFA, we continue to support recognizing unpaid care and informal work in public policy, transforming lifelong contributions into social security credits, for example, that the ILO is exploring and some countries have begun to explore, or expanding universal gender-sensitive social protection and policy frameworks. When we invest in the dignity and rights of older women, we invest in stronger families, healthier communities, and more resilient economies. Investing in older women is not charity, it's smart policy. So my question, as we are very aware that we've hit a bit of a setback, a temporary setback perhaps, in some of our global momentum in some areas, but how can we together translate the human rights of older women into policy frameworks that have teeth and tenacity required for sustained action and impact?
Thank you very much, Mr. Sneddon, and for all the work that you do and for the leadership of the IFA. I'm just cognizant of time. I'm going to move to the next discussant on the floor, Ms. Ambassador Rae. I know you have other meetings to go to, so on behalf of all of us here, thank you for your presence. I'll call upon Ms. Gabrielle Gallant with the National Institute on Aging in Canada.
Thank you. My name is Gabrielle Gallant, and I am the Director of Policy at Canada's National Institute on Aging. Based at the Toronto Metropolitan University, the NIA is the only research institute in Canada dedicated to advancing public policy for an age-friendly future. Canada's intervention in yesterday's General Assembly meeting raised the issue of challenges accessing disaggregated data on gender. At the NIA, we actually have a wealth of data on older women. In fact, our research shows that older Canadian women face unique and often acute challenges that demand strong, targeted policy responses. These issues are mirrored and in many cases magnified for older women around the globe. In Canada, our government's official estimates suggest that 5% of older adults live in poverty. The NIA examined poverty with a different metric in our Aging in Canada survey by leveraging the Material Deprivation Index, which is a measure that captures lived experience and not just relative income. It showed us something powerful. 15% of older Canadian women over the age of 65 are struggling, compared to 13% of men, more than double official estimates. And when we compare retirement savings between women and men aged 65 years and older, we see that fewer women are able to save for retirement. Given that, it's no surprise that our survey also found that fewer older women than men believe they'll be able to retire when they'd like to. And now I'll leave you with one final data point. One of the most striking findings from our survey is that single, racialized, older women who rent their homes are among the most vulnerable Canadians. These women face intersecting disadvantages, and that is because a lifetime of inequality simply does not disappear in old age. We can see the cumulative impact of lower lifetime earnings, unpaid caregiving, and time out of the workforce shows up clearly in later life. If we don't make older adults visible in our work towards the Sustainable Development Goals, we risk reinforcing instead of reducing the same inequalities we have committed to fighting. On behalf of the NIA, thank you to His Excellency Ambassador Rae, to HelpAge Canada, International Longevity Centres Canada, and the Canadian Mission for convening this important conversation as part of the UN's 2025 High-Level Political Forum. In closing, and with consideration to the research I've shared here today, I'd like to offer a question to the panel and to Ambassador Rae. How can Canada and the United Nations meaningfully include older adults, especially older women, in policy and planning? Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gallant, for your remarks. Finally, I'll call on Ms. Leila Sarangi with Campaign 2000.
Thank you very much to His Excellency who had to leave us, and to the panel. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Leila Sarangi, and I work in the NGO sector in Canada. My organization is Family Service Toronto. We're a large multi-service organization that provides community supports to people who live in poverty. We also backbone the Pan-Canadian Coalition called Campaign 2000 that works to end child and family poverty, and our members represent every province and territory in the country. And I am the national director for that organization. Our goal is to engage local NGOs and people living in poverty in policymaking processes. In Canada, as has been mentioned now a few times, and I will underscore that poverty for older people, it has decreased over the decades, but it persists. And progress since the pandemic has been eroding. Older women have lower incomes and higher rates of poverty than men. We don't have the data on those who are gender diverse, but experience tells us that they also have higher rates of poverty. Racialized women have the highest rates of poverty, and that's just driven by discriminatory policies and legislation. For example, immigrant women, many who are racialized, who have come to Canada on a sponsorship, cannot access the low-income supplement for seniors if they have not lived in Canada for more than 10 years. My question to the panel is also with regards to ensuring participation. A human rights-based approach requires meaningful participation of diverse senior women in the development and implementation and monitoring of policies that affect their lives. But there are often way too many barriers to participation. So my question to the panel is, how can governments and the Canadian government meaningfully support the participation of senior women who are living in poverty in the development of policy solutions? I am curious to know where you've seen it done well, what needs to be done going forward, and how the NGO sector can be leveraged. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Angim, and we look forward to partnering to end poverty for older persons in Canada and throughout the world. The discussants offered some thought-provoking questions. We invite the dialogue to continue, not just end at the conclusion of today's session, and you have some questions to chat over a cup of coffee. In closing, I would just make a final remark and say, look, I'd humbly suggest, that the prevailing geopolitical realities and geopolitical sensitivities are not lost on all of us. But neither are its implications. Its impact on our political, economic, environmental, cultural, and social climates is felt disproportionately, I would suggest, amongst older people across the world. And yet it remains imperative for all of us, particularly civil society, to be nimble and adaptive, yet remain steadfast and committed to our North Star. I would like to thank all of you for taking your time, dedicating your time, your knowledge, and your heart to this incredibly important work and cause. In closing, I would once again like to thank the Canadian Mission for their partnership and for hosting this event. With that, stay cool, stay hydrated, and be safe.